Good morning, everyone. My name is Inès Harriz. I'm an undergraduate student in HSM Montreal, and I'm part of the Forum des Affaires Mondiales de HSM Montréal. And today, my colleague and I will talk about alternative payment mechanisms.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Abhishek Duggal, and I'm currently pursuing a master's in financial engineering, and I'll be happy to talk about the topic today.
This discussion will start by understanding how international payments work between countries, handling transactions in different currencies and finance institutions. We'll discuss about the SWIFT payment system and its relevance in the international economy. Then we will dive into the domestic digital payment mechanisms being developed and used internationally. So my first question for you, Abhishek, is, first of all, what are international payments?
Yeah, so the thing is, in this context, the international payments we are talking about are not in the context of you going to another country, buying something, using your card. The international payments that we are talking about is more about the transactions that happen between governments, between central banks of different countries, between financial institutions and companies of different countries dealing with different currencies.
Okay, so it's a bigger sphere.
Yeah, it's more broader and more institutional and not retail. So it's not something we deal with on a daily basis, but something that the bigger organizations have to deal with and control in their day-to-day operations.
Okay, thank you. And how are these transactions between different currencies handled then?
Yeah, so they're different in the way that we will transact between, when you go to a grocery store, it's way easy for you to do a transaction because you give cash, you use your card, or you use your phone to do a payment. But when there are international transactions happening, it's more about, when it's between the governments and bigger organizations, they have to be sure about the exchange rates. And basically they, in theory, are deciding and controlling the exchange rates between the currencies, and the amount of money being moved is so large that there is a lot of complexity involved in handling these transactions.
Yeah, okay, that's true. And we know that transactions involves rate, right? And then how are these exchange rates decided and put into place then?
Well, the thing is that earlier and historically, these exchange rates have been basically made with respect to the gold reserves within a currency. Gold and silver have been a way to peg your currency, to benchmark it and carry out the value of your currencies. Basically, with the country which was richer had more gold and silver reserves, the currency would automatically have higher values. But right now we are more in free floating currency environment where it's more about the demand and supply of the currencies. The currencies are not really benchmarked to anything. They're free floating, as in they are fiat currencies, and some international currencies are benchmarked to other fiat currencies. For example, US dollar serves as a reserve currency for a lot of countries. So right now exchange rates are decided by more complex methods which evaluate the demand and supply of the currencies.
Okay. And I'm wondering, what is SWIFT? What is the SWIFT payment system?
Yeah, so the SWIFT payment system is basically the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It's a communication method used by bigger banks, central banks, and exchange organizations, like forex trading platforms. So what they do is the system helps in carrying out an international transaction from one international account to another. So it is not something that we would think of. It's not something like Visa or MasterCard. It's basically a communication methods that these organizations will use to settle the payments.
Okay.
So, for example, if I'm buying oil from someone in India is buying oil from Saudi Arabia and they're supposed to send US dollars to Saudi Arabian bank, they will be using the SWIFT payment system to transfer money from one bank account to another.
Okay, and SWIFT stands for
Society of Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication.
Okay, thank you. And earlier you talked a little bit about United States, and I have a question regarding United States. Why is the U.S. dollar the international reserve currency?
Oh,
Why not another country?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a huge historical context to it because when we think in the context of currencies, we would expect the value is being decided, based on the GDP of the country, based on progress, the development. And like historically, it has been something similar to that where countries which are richer had more gold and silver reserves had stronger currencies. But after World War II, what happened was that a lot of European countries they depleted their resources in war, and they ran out of money basically and resources. So they wanted to rebuild the cities that were destroyed in the war, but they had no financial way to do it. So at that point, US stepped in, which had drastically benefited from supplying weapons, food, and other supplies in the war to these European nations, and had a big amount of gold reserves. So there was a conference conducted. It was called the Bretton Woods conference, and which led to a thing called Bretton Woods Agreement, which basically what US did was it convinced other countries to use US dollar as a reserve currency. And because they did not have any gold, they just said, rather than borrowing gold from us, you will keep US dollars as a reserve currency in your central banks, and US dollar will act as a benchmark for gold. So, for example, at that point of time, if you had $1, you could go to the US Federal Reserve and say that this is my $1. Give me gold for my $1.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, but in 1970s, this system changed, and US moved away from the gold standard into the fiat standard, and this basically after the system of US dollars as a reserve currency was set up, they removed the gold standard, and right now all the currencies in the world are basically fiat currencies.
All right, okay. And what's the concept of petrodollar?
Yeah, that's a good question. The thing that even after 1970s, when gold was removed as the benchmark for US dollar, why didn't US dollar lose relevance? Why is it still important? Basically, the Middle East was the main supplier for the oil for the historical time between, I guess, 1980s to 2010s. It's only after, I guess, 2010s that US became the highest oil producer. Right now, it's again becoming net oil importer rather than exporter. And during that time, US, with its diplomacy and like the power and the control they hold, they made the Middle Eastern countries to trade the crude oil basically only using US dollar. So all the international oil trade that happened was done using US dollar, and the other countries did not really have a choice than to use US dollar, which basically increased the demand for US dollar in international market. And as I said, the exchange rates are right now determined based on the demand and supply of currencies. And since the demand of crude oil is always high, the demand of US dollar will always be high. And that's why US dollar will maintain its stature of a strong currency.
And legitimacy.
Yeah.
And are there alternatives to SWIFT? If yes, what are they?
Yeah, so there are a lot of alternatives to SWIFT. So first of all, SWIFT is just a communication mechanism, and currently a lot of other systems do exist. So such as IPS, also known as CHIPS, it does exist, and there is Fedwire, Ripple, etc., which are used in some sense. But since the Swiss system is so ubiquitous, like it's everywhere, and you basically require to do the the larger transactions. There's no real way to escape it. And we are seeing more alternatives, more robust alternatives to SWIFT coming up after the current events that are been happening in the geopolitical environment.
Okay. And what has the sort of requirement arisen from alternative mechanisms to SWIFT?
Exactly. So the thing with SWIFT is it's handled by a group called G10, group of 10 countries.
Okay.
Well, they present themselves as neutral, but it's still centered around the US and allied countries' policies. So every country who is part of the SWIFT infrastructure has to follow certain standards and certain requirements, which are required by those group of 10 countries.
Okay.
And the thing with this structure is that not every country would want to be part of or would not want to follow those rules. For example, we have seen that in recent times, the platforms like SWIFT have been used as a tool to impose sanctions on other countries and prevent them from doing transactions. And even if you are not someone who is with the country who is being sanctioned, for example, if we take the example of Russia, which has been sanctioned after the Ukraine war to prevent it from doing transaction internationally, even if you are not Russia and if you're some other country, you see it as a hurdle to your independence, that if in future you try to be more aggressive or your policies are not favorable to those in Europe or US, you might be cut off from this international system. So you would want your own independence to do international transactions. And that is why we are seeing these alternative systems come up all around the world.
Okay, so we can say that Russia is an equivalent of the SWIFT financial transfer system.
Well, they are trying to build that, but we are also seeing other systems being developed in other countries and other mechanism being proposed. And the main idea being that right now you might be on the favorable side of the Western nations, but in future, if your policies don't match up, you might be cut off and you would not want to put yourself in that position.
Okay, and we'll talk about BRICS. How are BRICS nations and the BRICS bank planning to build an independent international payment mechanisms?
Yeah, so in the context of the alternatives of SWIFT and the whole international monetary system, BRICS seems to be the most promising alternative that is being worked on for now. BRICS stands for the association of 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But there are plans to expand the organization to include Argentina, Indonesia, and other countries. BRICS has already established a bank called the New Development Bank. Basically, it's a bank developed to match and counter, or you can say in competition with the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So the nations in the BRICS association have their own mechanism to facilitate, bigger loans between these economies to facilitate financial integration between these economies. And they are working on having their own payment system, so they can, if in future there's a problem with SWIFT, they can directly bypass this system using their own. Something very interesting that they're doing is they are trying to create their own version of a reserve currency. So even IMF has this thing called the special drawing rights. It acts as a reserve currency for a lot of countries. So for example, Central Bank of Japan will have US dollars in its reserve currency, but they will also have IMF's special drawing rights. Which also acts as reserve currency. And the New Development Bank is working on something similar. So even if the BRICS countries do not trust each other with the financial interaction stuff, they still have a strong base to do transactions using this BRICS, New Development Bank's reserve currency.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We talked about the more international sphere with governments and central banks, and now we'll dive into the more domestic payment mechanisms, starting by asking ourselves, what is Visa and MasterCard? We're all using it right now, but what is it?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So, like apart from these international payment systems and mechanisms, the thing that we actually deal with on a daily basis are the domestic transactions that take place. For example, in Canada, if you're going to a store, there's a high chance that you will be using your Visa or MasterCard, and that's the case for majority of countries around the world. They are so ubiquitous. So what these technologies basically are these are gateways which help from transferring money from your account to the shopkeeper's account to the businessman's account and vice versa. They're also used for business transactions. Basically, Visa and MasterCard are the biggest players when it comes to payment gateways around the world.
Okay. Speaking about this, I'm thinking about Interac. Like, since we're in Canada, and what's the main difference between Interac and Visa MasterCard?
Yeah, so like Interac basically stands for the Canadian Interbank Network, and it's an indigenous technology which has been developed for use in Canada and facilitating the financial transactions between people and retail and business transactions inside the country. And we kind of see that system, like the indigenous development of payment interface systems around the world. If you go to India, you'll say the RuPay system. If you go to Russia, they have their own system. In China, they'll have their own system. And it's a really common thing that apart from having Visa and MasterCard, these countries are promoting their own systems. So, the basic benefit of having your own system is that you can have a control on the transaction costs. So, for example, if Visa and MasterCard they're basically US countries, like US companies. So, the transaction cost they will have might be higher than a businessman in India might want, because maybe of the currency exchange rate or the infrastructure by these companies is way more expensive. So if your country develops its own system, they have more control over the data, they have more control over how they want to implement these transactions, and obviously they have control on how they want to charge their users for using these platforms.
Okay, how do these digital platforms work?
Yeah, so they work basically, they're digital platforms. So they work due to the intensive computational and network infrastructure that has been put by these companies. So for example, Visa or MasterCard, they will have their servers located all around the world.
Okay.
And when you go to a business, like a shop or a business place, they will usually have a point of sale equipment which is connected either via the internet or their own telecommunication system, the one that you tap your card or insert your card in. So basically those systems are connected to the Visa infrastructure, and then that network infrastructure is connected to the infrastructure of the banks. So the transaction information will travel from your POS terminal to the Visa server, then to your bank, and then it'll pass through Visa again to the other bank you're transferring to.
Okay.
So that is how basically these digital platforms work. And the complexity of system is so huge that's why we only see two big names come up when it comes to the global stage of international platforms.
Okay. Do these domestic payment platforms really help in increasing digital transactions or not?
Yeah, they have a really important role to play when it comes to increasing and improving the experience of digital transactions, because what they do is they simplify things a lot by making use of cheap plastic cards. So it's way easier for you to transact your money, rather than logging into your account on your computer, making a transaction using internet banking. Directly using your card is way more easier when it comes to retail shopping. And similarly, the accessibility of having a digital platform to make your digital transaction is very high, because you don't have to worry about the change, the amount of change that you will get. You don't have to worry about carrying cash on you all the time. And the conveniences of using these cards add up with the point system that a lot of banks have. So that's why these platforms are helping facilitate the increase in digital transactions. But apart from that, what we are seeing is that a lot of other type of payment transaction systems are more effective in increasing the aspect of digital transactions in the economy.
Okay. And nowadays, do you think, like, how this digital economy progress at a more international scale in the space internationally?
Yeah. So I would want to tie with the last thing that I said, that, for example, I'll take the example of Unified Payment Interface, UPI, which is being developed in India. And it's a system that basically relies on using your smartphone for making a transaction. And it is like a cross-platform solution that people can use to do transaction from their bank account into someone else's bank account. And the accessibility of this platform is way higher than having access to plastic money or cards, because you're not required to have a POS terminal. So even the small shopkeepers, small businessmen who would not want to or could not have resources for maintaining a digital transaction interface, they can just use their smartphone to accept digital transactions and do digital transactions.
Yeah.
Earlier, what was seen in the developing economies was the digital platforms were used to make bigger ticket transactions. So, for example, if you are going to buy a washing machine or a refrigerator, you would use your card. But if you are going to a restaurant or buying some groceries, you will use cash.
Yeah.
But with these transaction systems, the convenience is increased so much that people are using these transactions, these platforms for doing very, very small transactions on daily basis. And it is increasing the digital aspect of the global economy. And with this increasing digital aspect, we are also seeing more development and more tracking of how the money moves in the economy. Because with cash, there is a lot of opaqueness. But when you have the ability to track the digital transactions, it helps in better governance and better policy decisions, because you know what industries are to be worked on and what industries are lagging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And do you think that we should move, like the world should move towards a common domestic payment interface platform?
Yeah, that's a very positive step if it could happen. So by a common domestic payment system, it basically means that let's say you're using Interac in Canada, and if you go to Europe or if you go to Africa, you could just use your Interac card and not worry about the transaction cost. You could not worry about the conversion of the currency, which is a big headache when you are a tourist and you're going to another country. So we are kind of seeing some aspect of this being implemented, being worked on in different countries. We have seen like the Chinese payment system adapting itself towards the other countries. So you can use that system when you go for business or tourism in other countries. You don't have to worry about conversion. You don't have to worry about if your card will work or not. Just go and transact. With India, I know that they're working with the companies in UAE, Singapore, and even they have mentioned France, that you could just go and use your Indian bank account to do your transaction in France. So with integration of these domestic payment platforms, it basically will increase the tourism industry, and also it will make business way more easier. So you won't have to worry about conversion and related, scams that happen with these transactions.
Yeah, sure. So we could say that the digitalization of the economy is better for the growth.
Yes, I mean, people can have different opinions about it, but it has been observed that the more digital the economy becomes, the more progress it observes. People might have concerns about privacy and how their data is being tracked.
Sure.
And I'm sure that people are working on having their own private, and developing platforms which are more private. We are seeing this with increase in adoption of cryptocurrencies. But even on the governmental scale, there are talks about centralized bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, which are supposed to act something similar. But again, those concerns are valid. But if you see it in a broad economic sense, the digitalization of the economy generally tends towards the increase in the economic output.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for this really interesting topic, and I'm sure that all listeners will finally reflect on this topic later.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic to look into, because we won't generally think about using when we use these technologies on a day-to-day basis, but we never think about how they work and how they really affect the
under the surface. Okay.
Yeah, how they affect the economy, how they affect our own conveniences of using different services. So and there is a lot of changes happening in this system because of the technology and also because of the geopolitical factors, and it's an interesting area to look into.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you listeners, and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.